Hi Ashley, thank you so much for joining me today at the SmartLab Exchange. Could you start off by telling me a little bit about your roles and responsibilities at Mars and how this relates to the wider corporate structure?
I work within what we call the Corporate Quality and Food Safety team. So although we have different business divisions within Mars, such as pet care and chocolate and Wrigley, we have a corporate team which look after quality and food safety standards for the organisation. So my role then within the lab science part of that team is to set the strategy for the business about how we do quality and food safety testing across our supply chain, whether that's raw material verification, in-process testing or finished product release. So what kind of capabilities and competencies do we need and how we should structure and organise to deliver those.
And what would you say are the major challenges you're currently facing in your role as the head of laboratory sciences?
How do we align? So Mars has come from a very organic business. It's grown geographically in very different ways, and that was very acceptable back, around in the 80s, the 90s, 2000s. That was fine. But at some point, you kind of realise, as a corporate business, you really need to have a very corporate presence and think about your impact around the world and how you operate as a business. Now, therefore, that requires standardization, and standardization is a key thrust of what we've been trying to achieve within our business over the last 10 years. That's quite difficult to do. And then standardization of testing is then something which we're striving and aiming for. So how do we set up the right capabilities, knowledge, competency? And within that, how do we work within the regulatory environment, which looks very different around the world too. So I think it's about getting the balance of standardizing for the right purpose, driving the right kind of knowledge and competency, and working within regulatory framework are probably the biggest things which we think about at this point.
Quality and compliance are at the heart of your role at Mars. How do you ensure your lab informatics systems are aligned with these requirements?
Yeah, great question. So really we're on a journey to think about how we standardize our systems. So at the moment, again, back to our history, then we've had different systems in different locations, and those solutions have been picked for different reasons. Local vendors maybe, so it's easy to establish a relationship, and we haven't necessarily standardized our work processes either. So now it's really a case of saying we need to have a different strategy. So we do have a preferred vendor for our LIMS, our laboratory information. We have a preferred vendor for our ELN solutions, and we're really now trying to align our business process to meet those requirements. Now, when we go through our conversations with our vendors, then we are, things like compliance of the systems and how they meet the industry requirements are some things which we're asking those guys, the vendors, to really evidence to us. And then we obviously need to do some verification of those processes, but we do rely quite heavily on the vendor to really demonstrate to us why we should pick them and how they are really compliant to the requirements we will have within food, which will be different than the strictures which are imposed on pharma, of course.
At this year's exchange, you'll be participating in a panel discussion entitled The Lab of the Future, Turning Science Fiction into Science Fact. Where do you see your lab heading in the next few years?
The whole experience here today, and yesterday actually, is really because we work in food, and to come to an event which has got a lot of pharma people within it, it gives you a very different exposure. So actually some of the things I've been thinking over the last couple of days have been, is my lab of the future the lab of the present for the guys in pharma? So the way they handle data, the complexity of the information which they look at. So that's been a challenge for me, and I think maybe there's an opportunity to learn and to leverage some of the knowledge which is out there already. For us at the moment, I think it's very much around how do you maintain. If you're going to invest in infrastructure, you're going to invest in people and invest in equipment, how do you make sure those are flexible, remain flexible for the future? So as our business need changes, that the lab is flexible to meet those requirements and those needs. Yes, having a flexible workforce, a flexible equipment base, a flexible lab space to a certain degree, that's really important to us. And I think the big challenge in my head is people are causes of issues within labs. So the more we can automize, then that's exciting for us to think about how we, especially in the area of micro, where we have a lot of issues with cross-contamination. So if you can take people out of the process flow, then that has some excitement. But the more data we start to handle, I think it's really around managing that data and what are the, if you're asking computers to start taking decisions for you on understanding a data set and making assumptions, how you validate those and check that those are constantly okay and are going to give you the right answer, because the last thing you want to do is to put something in the market which was based on a computer algorithm which has then delivered something incorrect. So yeah, as data gets bigger, more complicated, we need to rely more on computers. So that's great. And then there's the concern is, how do you balance that and make sure it's all going to be okay and validated? And that comes back to your earlier question on data validation again. And those are areas where I'm now worrying about, I need to recruit mathematicians, statisticians, and I don't put chemists in the lab anymore, I don't put microbiologists in the lab anymore, we're going more to informatics and data.
After hearing from solution providers at this year's Exchange, how has this changed your view of the lab informatics landscape?
We have a LIMS solution and we have an ELN. I think there are some interesting solutions outside of those areas which I wouldn't have thought of before. Resource management was one I was really interested in. So how do we think about crewing our labs effectively and making them operate? And there have been a couple of really interesting conversations with a couple of providers in those areas. And then yeah, just I think then it's around just actually understanding what some of the guys do. So companies like Oosthuis and Elsevier, actually I only know from publication, and then to see them have different service offerings was really quite interesting. So it broadened my perspective and horizon of what was out there.
And finally, how do you see laboratory informatics evolving generally in the next few years? What would this mean for your company?
Informatics seems to be evolving at an ever-increasing pace. You could talk about exponential growth. It just goes faster and faster and faster. I think the challenge for us and the kind of work which we do within quality control has often been around point data. So I have a result, I have a target range, does it meet the target? Yes, no, nice and easy decision, move on. I think as data becomes more complicated and data sets become more complicated, it's not so easy maybe to establish what are your yes-nos in the future and how we are going to move our kind of quality thinking and our quality processes and those accept-reject criteria in a very complex data world where now you have huge amounts of information coming out of different instruments. That is going to be a challenge for us, I think, and how we start to, what's the benefit? So you can go too far as well, so you have to find the right place. But it is just quantity of data and the size of the data set, I think, which is going to be the biggest challenge in working out how we effectively use it.